Okay, that's now recording. We're
Yep.
back on.
Oh, we're back. If we leave this in, just a bit of a technical error, so we're just going to restart at the point of what Jim had said about the need for experience.
Yeah, basically, the old saying is, especially the ones who have played Call of Duty, it's
Yeah.
not how big your weapon is, it's who wields it, basically. So you could have the most advanced tech vehicles or whatever, but if you don't have a properly trained crew to operate it correctly, and even trained crew to maintain it, then you won't get very far.
Yeah, BattleTech has a similar system as well. Like, I know this is just a war game and not real combat. If you have an experienced pilot in BattleTech in a ship battle mech, you'll take out a bad pilot in a good one.
I mean, yeah, but the whole system and idea of it comes from, reality. You can give, a revolver to a sniper and then a sniper rifle to someone who's never seen a gun in his life. Who do you think will aim better?
Very true. And the sniper would work out how to get into range with the revolver and shoot the guy with the sniper rifle, because the guy wouldn't have a clue how to track for that. So yeah, absolutely spot on.
Well, for this example, I was thinking these two would try to hit an apple or something, but yeah, you could go ahead and assume that they're gonna hit each other. Sure, it works both ways, anyways.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right as well. I mean, yeah, if you gave someone a gun who's never known how to use it, even if it was a sniper rifle, they probably wouldn't even be able to hit the apple at standard range.
Yeah, precisely my point.
Yep. I know this is gonna sound a bit annoying. I'm just gonna repeat the point as well, just as we had a bit of a buff in the recording. Just to go into a point I made earlier, which was what that was in response to. The leopards have never been used in a theater where the enemy has more firepower and air superiority. We've dealt with experience now. We've dealt with the lack of experience and new equipment. Let's talk about what the Russians have as well. As we were saying earlier, war is combined arms, and these leopards will have the Challengers, the Abrams and the Leopards, the Bradleys, all the Marders, all the new toys. There'll be artillery, and they'll need artillery and infantry support. And they'll have ground AA, but that might not hold up against overwhelming numbers of I keep on saying Soviet tanks, of Russian tanks. And then you're dealing with the air vehicle, the air support. For example, Ka-52 Alligators are basically a helicopter with anti-tank missiles. The Su-25, the anti-tank plane, the Iranian drones. Maybe the electronic warfare will be able to counter them, but the Iranian drones have been very effective calling in artillery, and the Russians have more artillery, they have more infantry. Also, while people are saying things like, oh, the Leopard can take a lot of damage, when they have artillery firing at them, because you might not have the capability, because, artillery, whoever spots each other's artillery first usually wins, because they can fire first, but when the Russians have so much more of it, that can put the Ukrainians at a disadvantage, so that might limit artillery support. So there might be windows where Russian artillery can fire at Leopard tanks with impunity. And while a direct hit might not damage the tank, if the artillery lands on the ground and the explosion happens near the Leopard, it can detract the tank. Yeah, the track can literally come off. It can destroy the optics, the radio. The tank could become unusable, in which case it has to be towed 500 miles to Poland to get repaired. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just to give us some combat examples now. I'll ring these off as fast as I can, and then you can tear into them. We've actually seen how vulnerable these tanks are without adequate support. Just as a brief note, Russian soldiers are getting loads of leaflets showing the weak areas of the Leopard, mainly the side and the rear. For example 1, I'll be very quick, 10 Turkish Leopards in Syria that were destroyed by ISIS using Russian anti-tank rockets and IEDs, completely destroyed them, but I'll get into, once these examples are done, I'll go into that one in a lot more detail because there's some myths about that one. 20 Abrams that were destroyed while the Saudis were using them, again being used without adequate support, just like the 10 Turkish Leopards. Example 3, the Challenger that was destroyed back in Iraq, getting flipped by an IED. Again, without the right support, these tanks are very vulnerable, they're not invincible. So, I'm just going to go into a bit of detail about the battle that resulted in the 10 Leopards getting destroyed. You might actually know something about this as well, Jim. Turkey used 10 Leopards in Syria and ISIS took them out with Russian anti-tank missiles, the same ones that Russian infantry have now, as well as IEDs. Same with the Challenger 2 in Iraq, in relation to the IED. Those were guerrilla fighters. Russian infantry trained and having one anti-tank launcher per platoon right now. The Russians are sending out, again, mass messaging exposing the Leopard 2's weak points. That could be deadly for the Leopards. The Leopard was originally designed for Cold War frontal duels. Armour is at the front and rear. The armour is at the front. The rear and side are the weak points. At Al-Bab, ISIS hit the tanks from those sides, both the sides and the back, and the missiles just penetrated right into the tanks and left them as smouldering wrecks. The Turks didn't use the tanks in a combined arms force. There was no artillery, no air support, and no strong infantry support to set a perimeter around them to stop guys just literally walking up to them from 4 feet away and blowing into them. Also, the Al-Bab tanks were on a hill top exposed with no support from infantry covering their position, and they had poor visibility due to snow and clouds, so drones and the Air Force couldn't really support them. So just to bust the myth, they were badly used, so I'm not saying these tanks are shit. They were badly used. What I am saying is, can the Ukrainians provide them with adequate support to use them effectively and stop them from getting picked off?
Depends on how you define adequate.
Well,
it all comes down to semantics, really. In reality, I don't see how they would so, because they've been at war for how much time now? A year?
It's going to be approaching a year soon.
Yeah. In this time, they were supposedly, strongly defensive, and maybe sometimes they were doing straight up, military attempts to go into defense. Don't see how they would have the time to train.
Yeah, unless
they were having, some troops being the front lines and training new troops, or even hiring mercenaries, which I haven't heard anything about.
They'd keep it secret anyway if they were doing either of those things. So it wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, I think that's the big danger. The fact they don't have any air support, and the artillery the Russians have just really outnumbers the artillery the Ukrainians have. So those are the two dangers. They can provide the infantry support for sure, I imagine. They've probably got enough left to do that. It's just, will that ground infantry be able to stop, focused assaults from Su-25s and Ka-52s? And that's going to be, because that'll be the danger. Overwhelming artillery, huge numbers of tanks, and that's the other thing as well. It's very easy to have your infantry target air assets when they're not being engaged by ground infantry, but if the Russians actually use effective tactics with overwhelming numbers, I'm not sure this could work.
They wouldn't. But then again, have we seen Russia using proper tactics?
We've seen Wagner using improved tactics against a very depleted Ukrainian military, but what we're talking about with the spring offensive, as you say, is a very it will be reinforced with modern weapons, probably artillery support, because they've been given more artillery guns to the point where the British Army's been complaining that we're giving them too many and it's leaving us vulnerable. But that's another topic in itself. So I imagine the spring offensive, the Russians might not be able to handle that. It'll be very prepared, and I imagine Zelensky will be working with NATO partners to make sure it's prepared and that it does succeed. It wouldn't surprise me if it fails. I hope it doesn't. I hope I'm right in that it does work, because part of me thinks it will.
I believe it will make a difference, but I don't believe they'll be able to wield this equipment properly and effectively. At least not to the point where it would actually make a big difference, which goes back to the fact that I believe there are definitely certain parties that want to drag out the war as much as possible.
Oh yeah, definitely, like arms companies. Unless all of this is just a smokescreen and the crews have already been trained.
Could be, yeah, possibly. Which would be another reason why Zelensky wants to apply pressure for them to give the different vehicles as fast as possible.
Yep.
Because if they have the crew trained, ready, waiting for the tanks to arrive, then yeah, that would make sense for him to apply as much pressure as possible and become desperate.
Yep. just as an offshoot as well, I'm not sure if this is true or not. I've not been able to verify it. Apparently, there's been some Leopard tank crewmen who've said it takes years to train someone in a Leopard. I know the Challenger 2 has quite a long training time, but I don't know how much validity there is to the 3 years requiring to train for a Leopard 2. I've got no idea if that's true or not. So, if
I
it
have no
is
idea
true,
either.
yeah, if it is true, that's a disadvantage straight away. If it's not, but it might not be true, so I can't put that one down as fact. Now we get on to what you were saying, because this is really the criticism of the tank is really the criticism of the situation is probably one of the main bodies of this actual cast. We do appreciate this is a long one, so we'll probably do it in 2 parts. It's just there's a lot of information to be processed here, and we both want to do a thorough job, right, Jim?
Yep.
What you were saying before, maintenance. There's also a problem with maintenance. This is new technology for the Ukrainian military. They are getting 3 different tanks. The Challenger, So first of all, differences between the tanks. The Challenger and the Leopard, they're diesel, while the Abrams has a fucking jet engine. So it needs jet fuel. Furthermore, the Challenger 2, it's like a puzzle game. The Challenger 2 uses a different type of ammo to the Leopard and the Abrams. And extra training may be required to make sure the tank crews are able to use the different tanks, or at least they'll have to be retrained should they need to be moved to another one. So for example, if the Abrams get destroyed, and those crews might have to be retrained to the Leopard too. And just to finish off this quick one, the Abrams is the one that's an absolute bastard to maintain. Even the Marines say in the US say that it's a nightmare to maintain during peacetime. Because obviously it has a jet engine, it requires very high-tech parts, and because it moves at high speeds, a lot of its parts have to be passed through maintenance sensors to make sure that they fit the requirements, such as armor plates, and the armor plates have to have tails as well. That level of maintenance could only be done in Poland. So again, if the Abrams goes wrong or needs to be maintained, you're looking at a 500-mile supply line from Donbass to Poland.
Yeah.
And Russia and an American general actually said that the Ukrainians aren't great when it comes to logistics with spare parts, but they've openly admitted it. Now, just a statement of the obvious here. People might have a go at them being in Poland, but let's be realistic. The Ukrainians actually need this to be the case. The workshops that are in Ukraine are currently on the move, because if they weren't, and that does limit their effectiveness, if they weren't on the move, the Russians would bomb them into the Stone Age. Technicians take months to be trained, and their current workshops are always on the move again, which again reduces the effectiveness. Needless repetition there, that's my bad. The British government also wants to build an arms factory in Poland right next to the Ukrainian border, so having the technicians in Poland is more effective anyway, because if they get killed from a combat stance, it'll take months to train new ones.
True. Yeah.
So, yeah, we've already covered how it can take weeks to train the crews on the Challenger 2. And again, we've already covered how it can turn into a nightmare. A really interesting one I found, the tanks may not actually be able to function in Ukrainian cities and on their infrastructure. So, for example, in 2015, there was an act passed that banned all vehicles of 44 metric tons, 49 US tons, due to the damage that they could be inflicted on the roads and bridges because of their weight. The Leopard and the Challenger are 62.5 tons, and I think the Abrams is about 70. So these tanks will actually struggle to cross bridges, and they'll require additional support to cross rivers. They may also get caught in bogs and other difficult terrain conditions if they go off-road, and they'll require a lot of support. It's also the same for rural Ukraine. The roads and the bridges are only meant to sustain 44 tons. They'll need pontoon crossing equipment, and they'll need specialist tanks that form bridges to get them across rivers and things. So it won't be massively bad. It'll just be another nitpick where they'll have to find actual crosses where these tanks can cross into position. It's not so bad because they're offensive tanks, but that's them moving to a position to an attack like a formation. When it comes to city defense, the Challenger is an offensive tank, it's not a defensive tank, is the IED that flipped one in Iraq showed. So these tanks will be restricted with how they can move in cities and the Ukraine infrastructure, so in a city fight, it'll put them at a disadvantage as well. So that'll mean crews there'll have to be more training spent for everyone involved in the tanks. The
But
maintenance
that
crews.
is true. But didn't you mention that most of the tanks were artillery, or was it or did I misunderstood?
You may have misheard. The Leopard, the Challenger 2, and the Abrams are combat tanks. The artillery guns
All right.
they're a separate piece of support.
Okay then. Yeah.
It's just the mainstream media is not focusing on the artillery. They're really fetishizing the tanks.
Yeah. Then you're correct. You're absolutely right. I don't see how they would move them around if they have problems. Because say if two tanks manage to get around, but then the streets behind them are destroyed. I mean, that's like.
Yep. And you've got to have more excessive training needed because of it to adapt for it. So support crews, logistic crews, command crews, maintenance crews, the tank crews themselves all have to get used to the new weight because they're a lot heavier than the Ukraine's old tank.
So they're on what?
These new tanks are a lot heavier than their old tanks.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to put forward though, and it was History Legends that predicted this, and to be honest, I kind of saw the same thing coming. But this guy's normally spot on with what he says. Every time the mainstream media have these late time scales for any weapons, we actually saw them much earlier. I personally agree with him that the Ukrainians have most likely already been trained on these tanks, and everything we're seeing now is just a smokescreen. He actually predicts that these tanks will be seen in combat as early as February. I agree it's very possible. What do you think?
That would be interesting. It is possible. You cannot say something. You cannot exclude scenarios the way things are at the moment because you don't have all the facts and data, and it's possible to have all of them. So there is certainly a big margin that is unpredictable as to what will happen. But yeah, it is a wait and see scenario. But when you say February, you mean like this February?
Pardon?
When you say they will be ready for February, you mean this February?
Yeah.
Next month.
Maybe.
I do believe it's a bit unlikely, but not impossible. Because
wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, but at the same time, stuff like that, they do like to take their time.
Yep.
So, from the one point, yes, Zelensky is applying pressure to get everything on time, like as quickly as possible. But even if they say, right, we're sending them now, it would still take some time to get there.
Yep.
I don't expect them to just, magically in the next 2 hours to arrive. They would take at least a few days because they're big pieces of.
I think his implication is that everything has already been set up and everything was agreed. What we're just seeing in the mainstream media is just a show.
Oh, okay. So it's just pretty much the okay for them to actually show them that we have the tanks ready to use them.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that. That's actually another big possibility, which wouldn't surprise me.
Yep, it just wouldn't surprise me, that's all. I'm willing to agree with him and say it's very possible. I'm not going to call him a kook. The guy's actually very good with what he does. Same with average infantrymen. I've got to say, they're better than the mainstream media.
Yeah.
Last couple of points for this. I think I touched on this before. This is just a quick one. The actual consistency of the Leopards. We touched on it earlier with the different models. The consistency of the tank's conditions and equipment. The German army has been very underfunded, well below NATO's required GDP percentage. Consequently, this has created a difference in standards between different exporters. As a result, many could lack the weapons production and electronic warfare and battle computer upgrades of the A7 Plus model. For example, Denmark, I think, were the only ones who were potentially providing an A7 Plus. So you're going to get, I think from what we were looking at, the majority of the tanks are from the 80s, so they're the 80s era. Again, Poland has the PT-21s that they said that they might offer, but really, you'd bet I think the Ukrainians were hoping they'd get the A7 Plus the A7 models, sorry. But like I said, I think it's only Denmark that's providing them. The majority of them seem to be the A4 from the 80s, and the Germans and some other countries have provided the A6. So you're not going to get the high caliber latest gen tank right across the field. What you're going to end up with, again, miniature wargamers have probably done this on tabletops. this would be like their dream, even though this is a very serious historical event. I mean, it's very historic that these tanks are going up against the Russian military. You're going to have a hodgepodge of different Leopards working alongside Challenger 2s and Abrams. Because they need to be kept in this number. You can't just put them in driplets along the front line where they'll get picked off. They need to be used as either 2 blocks of 50 working in unison or a block of 100 backed up by infantry. The Bradleys, the Chieftains, and the new German transport will be excellent support for that. So,
True. Very true.
Inconsistent, but if used right, it might actually work. And then we go to just a quick check. Then we go to Russia's reaction to this. This is going to be a quick one. Russia's red lines. Russia is not to be invaded under any circumstances. I don't think the Ukrainians have the capability to do that, even with these tanks. No NATO troops in Ukraine. Well, as far as we're aware, there aren't any. Russia has reacted to this, claiming this to be a dangerous game, as well as showcasing footage of the Su-25s, the tank-busting plane. I mean, they're going to do that. And just what I said before, this could actually favour them if they're able to destroy the tanks and whittle down NATO's already depleted and underfunded militaries. A big point is that the 2,000 Leopards that were across Europe, that was a big deterrent, to put Russia off a ground war, that unified force of 2,000 Leopards. And if they get caught in this kind of fight where that number gets depleted, with the state of some of NATO's militaries, looking at the British and the German militaries, for example, even the French to some extent, you could see a deterioration of NATO if this goes wrong.
Yes, I mean, I think this is also the main reason why NATO took so long to act. I mean, we're 1 year in, and it's at this point where NATO is seriously sort of discussing in sending armed vehicles like tanks and stuff.
Yeah.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but throughout this year up until now, it was mostly the other countries that were sending supplies and whatnot. And it's only now that NATO decided to try and do something, right?
NATO were supplying them, but they were supplying them with Soviet-era technology. But as said before, they were very dependent on Russia as a big partner for their munitions. Obviously, that's out the window. So it's not until very recently that they had actual assistance from NATO.
Okay.
Yep, and beyond that, the last section, which I'm just going to double check. Sorry, my notes are a mess. Yeah, the last part, which we can probably spend a little bit of time on if you like. I only had 3 little points there. The war economy and weapons testing. This is a very big topic. We're not going to go into detail with it now because it's a big topic in itself. It's just it has a couple of relevant points. It's been suggested that there's a lot of ulterior motives in relation to why these tanks are being deployed. A lot of people are and I thought this at first, could this just be them testing these tanks because they currently are the modern tanks, even though the Abrams they've got is fresh off the production line, which emphasizes it even more. The Challenger 3 is going to be the upgrade for the Challenger 2s, but the Challenger 2 isn't that different from the Challenger 3, and the Leopard isn't really close to getting replaced by the K-51 yet. So and also you've got the Bradleys and the new German transport. Even though the Bradley's about to get replaced, you've got German transports that are getting sent in as well. My point is, you've got all this modern day equipment being sent in, even though some of it's about to be replaced. People are suggesting that they're using the Ukrainian war as a lab to basically test all these weapons against modern day Russia for a war either with Russia or in preparation for China. That's what's being suggested. Do you think there's any truth to that?
So to say, I believe there might be some truth to it, but not, concrete.
Yeah. It
does
just
sound
a
a bit far. It does sound a far-fetched fact, but as a theory, it's not completely impossible. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean that was
something definitely. It's definitely something to have on the back of your head, though.
Yep. I mean that was the tinfoil hat theory with Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan, leaving all the American equipment behind. Like I said, I put tinfoil hat in there because there's no proof of this. I'm not saying this is my opinion either. This could be a topic in itself. I'm not going any more into it other than this. People said the same thing about that. They thought he left all the American equipment in the hope of China coming into Afghanistan or the Russians and the Taliban using American equipment would test out the American equipment against those militaries. So it's always something that's suggested whenever foreign equipment goes in, especially now because we're seeing direct conflict on Russia, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
With these tanks. And just the last point really that I had, this is going to be a hell of a commercial for the Leopard. And if obviously if the conflict becomes a vehicle grinder, the factories that make it and the arms company that sells it will make a fortune. I know 3D printers on eBay are printing off miniatures of the Leopard like there's no tomorrow, and they're selling. So all the wargamers are getting them. So the Leopard's really entering the limelight, and just as an interesting side note, a lot of people had really never heard of the Leopard because you never really see it in video games, you never really see it in war comics or anything like that. It's always the Abrams, the Americanized, the American army in movies. You've got ordinary people who just don't care about the military know what an Abrams is, but no one's ever heard about this tank. And again, it's this historical point where the Leopard might become the defining tank of NATO. I mean, it pretty much is because most of the NATO countries use it. It's just America's a superpower, so you see more of the Abrams, and the smaller countries are reluctant to use theirs for the money. So, for the money they cost. The challenge is the same. Britain doesn't have a lot of them, so they go in small numbers, even though they're an effective tank with the support. We might be seeing just a cultural era of the Leopard because of this war. I just thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, it is.
And just to finish off on, just to the audience, this is actually truly historical. It's a tragic scene, but this is really historic that these tanks are actually going toe to toe with the modern day Russian military.
Yeah,
it's terrifying.
It really is.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it for me. Just going through the notes.
Yeah, I pretty much covered anything I wanted to say on the topic. Yeah, I don't think I left anything else.
If that's the case, just an apology to the audience about the technical difficulty we had with splitting the podcast into two. Something happened with the recording. No information's being lost or anything like that. So luckily, we're just uploading it into two parts. It's also a long one, so it's probably better we do.
Yeah, true.
Thank you for listening. This was a very complicated one to put together. We hope you found it enjoyable or you found something useful in it. If you agree, disagree, or have something you want to add, don't forget to add in the comments. Please hit the trinity of the like, subscribe, and the little bell. Jim, just before we go, just to make sure, anything you want to add?
No, not really. Just if you want to, we occasionally are active on Twitter as well, posting various spicy memes, ridiculing today's politics and other topics. So yeah.
Unfortunately, we are a small channel, and both Jim and I have full-time jobs, so we try and come on when we can.
Yeah. We're
not one of these millionaire YouTubers, but like I said, we do this as a fun project, and we do like doing the content. So we will be producing more content. I'll try and be a bit more active on Twitter as well. And for anyone listening, thanks for listening. Don't forget to interact if you have something to say, even if it's disagreement. It's fine. And
especially if it's a disagreement.
Yeah, Jim likes to argue.
No, I'm not.
But thanks for coming, and thank you all. Have a good week.
A good week. See you on the next one.
Bye, guys. High five.